All right, I will start right away in English because the lecture will be in English. Everybody, shalom and welcome to our new episode. I will say, yeah, really episode. I think it's the sixth one or seventh one. I don't know. In our new beginning that's called OZ Lounge, where we get together as a community for presentations, lectures, education. Not directly related to the Torah study, which we have a lot being in quarantine, but definitely with a strong Jewish flavor. And today, I hope you're not going to swallow the coin and feel if it has a Jewish flavor of gefilte fish or not. This is not the meaning of the Jewish flavor, but definitely, as we said in Russian, "Миру мир евреям деньги." I'm sorry for the quoting myself again and again, but I really want you to join me and give a big thank you to Likhtenstein that agreed to give this presentation, and I see he prepared very, very thoroughly, and I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. It will be recorded, and after Alex's approval, it will be published on my channel on the YouTube and probably on Facebook as well. Now, about the security and technical issues. It's pretty impossible to make the lecture interactive during the on Zoom. So please not disturb the presenter. If you have any questions during the lecture, please write them down in the chat. I will voice them out at the end of the lecture, or Alec will be able to read them himself, how he will feel comfortable. And then the lecture also mute everybody, and everybody will be able to answer the questions as well. Now, without further ado, I pass virtually the microphone to Alec. Alec, go ahead. I'm muted. And I'm muted you already? Good.
Great. All right, so let's get started. You have the access back, right, Asher?
I got everything. Just
you. All right, perfect. Okay, so let's get started. So I don't really know, who knows how much or how little about crypto, but I just wanted to start with what this lecture is not going to be. I'm not going to be talking about trading. I'm not going to be talking about prices. I'm not going to be talking about investment advice. I'm more going to be talking about sort of what the what Bitcoin is, what it does, kind of what money is, and you can make your own conclusions based on that. I'm not giving trading tips. I'm not telling you go buy this coin, go buy that coin. Nothing I'm saying is investment advice. Okay, let's get started. So first, what is Bitcoin? So Bitcoin is really two things, right? The first thing is there's the technology that it introduced, which most people call the blockchain. And what it really is the internet of money. Now, when people think of Bitcoin, they think of BTC, the actual cryptocurrency. That's really just the first application that's really done using the Bitcoin technology. Saying that, Bitcoin is the only thing that just the currency is the only thing that Bitcoin is would almost be like saying that all the internet is email, because that's the first application that made sense to do on the internet. So let's talk about first some of the features of Bitcoin itself, and we're going to go more into detail with all of them pretty soon. So if you don't understand something right now, I'll most likely be explaining it later. So Bitcoin is essentially a digital currency. Money you can use essentially on the internet. It doesn't have a physical coin associated with it. It has several unique features. One is that it's decentralized. There's no central issuer of the currency. For most currencies that you think of, let's say the U.S. dollar, where does the U.S. dollar come from? It gets printed by the central bank. Most money most currencies that are used in the modern world are essentially printed by central banks. They're called fiat currencies. Way back when, you'd also have kings issue their own currency, you'd have certain nobility issue their own currency. But with Bitcoin, there's no central person issuing it. It's not issued by any single person. There's no one person in control. A second unique feature of Bitcoin is that it is censorship resistant, meaning nobody can What? Can everyone hear me? I just hear some noise.
Yeah, we can hear you. I'm just turning the microphone for everybody who is. Dada Slava.
Yeah. Okay. So perfect. So the second unique feature of Bitcoin is that it's censorship resistant, meaning nobody can censor your transactions. Which means that if I want to send money to somebody else and I decide to, send it to somebody else, there's no third party that can jump in the middle of my transaction and freeze my transaction. So, for example, like if I was sending a wire transfer or let's say a PayPal payment, theoretically PayPal could stop the payment. Theoretically, the bank can say, no, we're not sending this payment. With Bitcoin, that can't happen. The third is that it's private. Unlike transactions that you have on your bank, whether with your credit card or something else, where where every transaction you make is essentially linked to your real identity and they know literally all your purchases. With Bitcoin, it's private. Whatever purchases you make. That said, it's not anonymous, and there's a difference, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. Number 4, it's permissionless. I don't need anyone's permission to send anything, really. I don't need to ask some trusted third party, hey, am I allowed to send this or not? Another thing it's open source. Open source means that all the code that the Bitcoin is built off of, it's open source. So anyone in the world can view the code, anyone in the world can audit the code, anyone in the world can read the code. So everybody knows how it's built, what it's made, what it says. Well, everyone that's a computer programmer anyway. And then and the last feature is that it's borderless. It's not something you can only use in the US or you can only use in Africa or you can only use in Russia. It's not just borderless, it's border neutral. Because it's a digital thing, you can send it anywhere. And I should also point out that's not just the currency that has these features, but the technology enables these features for a lot of other applications. And all the potential different applications really have in common is that they eliminate the need for a centralized point of trust. So with a lot of things we do in life, especially in finance, we have to rely on trusted middlemen. These trusted middlemen end up, getting a lot of power, and they charge a lot and they have a lot of control. In the case of Bitcoin, the main trusted middleman that it's sort of making redundant and not needed are pretty much banks and different payment transfer services. But there's a lot of other applications that you can theoretically make with this. Some potential applications are things like, and some of these exist right now, some of them don't exist yet, but some of them are things like having decentralized finance. So for example, right now, if you want to, if you want to put your money somewhere where, some sort of an interest account, you have to talk to a broker, then you have to talk to a salesperson, they each take their fees, then you put it in, and then there's somebody doing the books for you, and there's all these fees associated with that. Or let's say you want to take a loan, right? So you go to a loan company, they take a fee, then they have their lawyers draw up contracts, those take a fee, then you send them to the bank, and then there's all these processes, etc. Theoretically, and these do exist, right now, you can take loans using decentralized finance and the blockchain without any of these middlemen. And I'll explain a little bit later how exactly that works. Then you have things like stock and asset registration, notarization. So for example, right now, if you wanted to buy certain assets, certain stocks, there's all these hoops you have to jump through. Theoretically, they could all be stored much more securely and much more cheaply on the blockchain. A good example of this would be something like real estate. And this isn't really an example that's so relevant in America or the West, where we have really trusted third parties for the most part, but it is very relevant in the developing world. So for example, like let's say you live in some village in Africa, right? And you own a plot of land. Where's the record of this plot of land? You have it in whatever your municipality or wherever it's stored. But let's say you have a corrupt government. And let's say, a friend of the people in government wants to now take your land. All it takes is a little slip of a paper to say, oh, no, you don't own that. This person really owns that. But if you're able to store it in a way that's completely decentralized, that's trustworthy, that doesn't require a third middleman, that doesn't require a trusted middleman, then theoretically you could just store real estate registries on the blockchain. Another example is being able to have distributed fair voting. There's a lot of talk now about, especially now with Corona, maybe some states want to do mail-in ballots. Trump's saying no, they're just going to stuff the ballots, etc. One of the big issues with doing digital voting is people are afraid of fraud, theft, hacking, etc. But it is possible using blockchain to be able to have actually secure digital voting where you don't have to trust any third party not to cheat, essentially. You can have reputation systems done the same way. You could have secure digital identity systems. You could have media censorship resistant. Now there's a lot of talk now about different censorship that's going on Facebook, on Twitter, and YouTube. Maybe for good reasons, maybe for not so good reasons. Depending on your political persuasion. But theoretically, you would be able to build systems where censorship can't happen, or if it does happen, it would have to be with a consensus mechanism. It wouldn't be with Facebook deciding or YouTube deciding. You can have decentralized prediction markets and a lot more. Over here, you have a lot of other examples, and like I said, we'll get into some more detail hopefully in a bit. So first, I wanted to start with the history of money. Because to really understand, how Bitcoin works, you really have to understand how money works and kind of what it was historically versus what it is now and how it's developed. So money, when you get right down to it, what is it really? It's a ledger. It's a scorecard for society. Back when you had very small tribes of hunter-gatherers, you'd have everyone living in this very small knit community. And basically, if you were the person that was making the arrows, you'd have one person that would make arrows, you'd have another person that was hunting, and they basically all share things in different capacities. But essentially, let's say you're the arrow maker, right? And you made arrows for this hunter. So now he knows he owes you because you made him the arrow. So when he goes and kills a prey, you're gonna be able to ask him for some of the meat because he has that obligation to you. It was really an economy of favors and obligations on the small scale. And then when they would basically have, and for the most part, it would be self-sufficient little economies. But there were certain rare items that they'd be able to potentially get. And then the way they would then trade those items with other kind of small self-sufficient groups would be through the barter economy. Okay, we have these shiny shells that you want. Okay, give us these, these cool pebbles that we want, or something along those lines. But eventually, as society got a little more advanced, you had the agricultural revolution, you had larger population centers. At some point, bartering just wasn't efficient anymore, because when you have the rise of cities, and I say cities not like the cities we're thinking of today, but just larger communities, when you have kingdoms, what you end up happening is you end up having specialization, right? Before, you had these small communities that were pretty much self-sufficient. But now you realize that, hey, the land that I live in, I actually make the best wine out of anyone. My shoes aren't so great, my this isn't so great, but my wine's the best because I'm on this great land, right? What if I just, instead of doing a little bit of everything, I just focus on this wine, since people are willing to pay much more for my wine, and I can get everything else I want. I can get much higher quality by selling my higher quality wine instead of just having some high quality wine for myself and making, subpar shoes, subpar sandals, whatever else it is. And once you have these specializations, and once you have these it becomes increasingly difficult to really work on just the barter economy, because not everyone wants the same things, and it's also very hard to figure out how much something's worth. Because let's say, I want to sell you my wine, and I want your apples. How many apples is this wine worth? You can sort of try to figure it out, but you might not even want the apples right away, or you might not want my wine right away. And it gets very complicated. So eventually what you really end up having was commodity-based money, where you would have, whether it was gold or silver or shells, or different types of commodities, where okay, we have this certain commodity that's the base for what we're trading, and you could have different types. You could have cows, for example. I think Usher can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have some halachas about how certain things are worth certain amounts of cows, etc. And once you have those kind of standard units of measure, that works as money. And all these things. Wait, hold on, I got a chat. Camels, yes. So some things worth 2 camels, some things worth 3 camels, and then you sort of have standard. You have sort of standardization of value, and you're able to trade all these different things now because they're worth X amount of silver coins, X amount of camels, X amount of gold coins, whatever it is. And all of these commodities are things that are limited by nature, and they're actually representing things that really exist. Then as certain societies developed, you had a lot of the commodity money, specifically a lot of the coined money that kings would make. You had what was known as fiat develop. So in the example of the Roman Empire, so at first the Roman Empire had these coins that they would issue that they would be worth, I think they'd essentially be worth their weight in silver, right? They were silver coins. And then kind of as time went on and as they had less silver, but they still had more expenses, they started having, each coin started being worth less and less silver. Until eventually they basically said, okay, we're just going to be issuing these coins, and these coins are worth what we say they're worth. And that's what was known as fiat money. So fiat in Latin means let it be done. So it's essentially saying the government says that this thing is worth whatever the government says it's worth, and that's it. And it wasn't the craziest thing in the world because, on the one hand, now it's not worth the silver or worth the gold. It's literally worth whatever, it's just worth something because the government says so. So on the one hand, that's very much imaginary. It doesn't have intrinsic value. But on the other hand, commodities, certain commodities don't really have intrinsic value either. In jails, things like, actually, maybe not the best example, but in a lot of jails or like POW camps, like cigarettes were currency. But if you take modern American jails, one of my friends, who's a big Bitcoin guy, he went to jail for a year, and he wrote this whole very interesting article about how what they use as money in the federal penitentiary system is mackerels. There are these cans of dried mackerels, basically, right? And they had 2 types of currencies. They had money max and some other type of max. I forgot what they were called, but basically one of them was mackerel cans that were still edible, that weren't expired, and the other one was mackerel cans that were expired, so you couldn't even eat them, but they still served as money inside of the jail system. But anyway, so fiat money has really taken off in recent years. In the U.S., a long time, we used to use the gold standard at some point. And hold on, I got another chat. Expired mackerel is fiat money. Yes, correct. It's a good example. So, like the U.S. dollar, you used to be able to go to the mint theoretically and get a certain amount of gold or whatever else it was per dollar. I believe it was in the 70s that we totally went off the gold standard and became totally fiat. And it's not just the U.S. dollar. Almost every currency right now that's government issued is based on nothing. It's just based on trust in your government, but it's not based on any limited resource. And as we know with how much the Fed is printing right now, they can just keep printing it. And again, in the U.S. it hasn't been as big of an issue, but in a lot of developing countries, you've had currency crashes that happen all the time. I think Argentina's had like 4 or 5 currencies go into complete hyperinflation and total devaluation in the last couple of decades. But we'll talk more about that later. First, let's talk about the properties of money. What makes sound money, essentially? It really needs to have 3 properties. One is it has to be a unit of account, meaning, like we said before, what was the problem with the barter system? You don't know how much anything's worth. So money has to be able to standardize what things are worth. In other words, $1 is worth $1. Hold on, I get another message. Yes, Venezuela is another good example. So $1 is worth $1, right? Or a gold coin is worth, whatever that gold coin is worth in society. 2, it has to be a medium of exchange. It has to be something where you could actually change it with people. So for example, cows aren't the best forms of money because it's really hard to use them as mediums of exchange. If I want to buy something from you and I have to give you a third of a cow, how does that work exactly? Do I cut the cow in a third, then is the rest of the 2/3 worth something? So it has to be something, for it to be good money, it has to be something that works as a medium of exchange. That's actually one of the things that makes gold a little bit harder, because imagine, you have a bunch of gold and then you have to somehow break it up every time you have to pay for something. It would make it pretty difficult. And then third, and perhaps most, one of the most important things, that has to be a store of value. It has to be something that people are willing to pay money for, and something that holds its value. Because if no one wants to buy Venezuelan dollars because they're not worth anything, and as time goes on, they're worth less and less. So whatever functions as sound money, as money that actually works, it has to be able to store value over time. All right. Next. So next, I want to kind of go over a lot of the problems that existed in the monetary system, in the banking system, before Bitcoin. So one of the problems, and we've sort of touched on some of these already, but so one of the problems is runaway printing and devaluation. Governments, politicians, central banks, whoever can just decide, oh, I want to pay for more things, I'm just going to print more money. And all of the people in my country that have their savings in my money, etc., who cares? I'm just going to print more money. They don't have to. You just loaned your money to the bank, right? They owe you the money back, but you don't really own it anymore. One of the first time that Bitcoin really became, the first time it shot up to sort of over $100 when it really became popular, and it was on CNN and Fox, and that's sort of when I was interviewed for all these things, was when they were having a big banking crisis in Greece and Cyprus. And basically what happened there was, they had a huge credit crisis. The government and the banks couldn't pay back their debts. And so they stopped giving people the money they had in the bank. They only let them withdraw, pennies on the dollar of what they had in. I forgot what the percentage was, but let's say whatever, they could only withdraw 20% of what they had in the bank or something like that. And that's not a unique situation in history. It's happened over and over again. Hold on, I think I have another message. I can't see it. So now send me another message so it pops up again so I can see the previous one. Okay, got it. FDI, yes. So FDI, so you have FDIC. So in the US, which again, like I said, the US is a little bit better placed than most places. But in the US, the banks have to have what's called FDIC insurance, where I believe the first $250,000 that you deposit is technically insured. But again, what does that mean? If the whole banking system collapses, what does that insurance really mean? If a small bank collapses, sure, the insurance still works. But if the whole system collapses, I'm not so confident that it will still work. But again, FDIC insurance is something we do have in the US. It's not something that you have ever in the world, certainly not in developing countries. Okay. A third problem, which has been getting better actually in the last 10 years since Bitcoin's been around, I think largely as a response to Bitcoin and other blockchain technologies, is that to send money internationally is very difficult. It's very slow. It's very expensive. In certain countries, it's super hard. It's very to send it back and forth to Africa. It's very hard because most people just don't have banks, and banks will only work with other banks. Even when you can send it, let's say you do a SWIFT transfer, there's a charge. It takes a few days, etc. Western Union is a really common way where people do remittance. I'm not sure what Western Union charges now, but I do remember in 2013, which was a few years into Bitcoin, Western Union would charge ridiculous fees. They would charge 20% sometimes on transfers that you send internationally, which is just crazy. And it's really unnecessary. Or maybe it was necessary for them because of however their business model worked. And another issue is you have a lack of autonomy with your funds. Let's say I want to PayPal somebody some money, and PayPal says, we don't really like this transaction you're doing. They can not only stop the transaction, they can totally freeze my funds. Or let's say, God forbid, the federal government's coming after you and let's say you're being framed, you're innocent, blah, blah, blah. what do they do when they bring a case against you? They freeze your assets. That's the first thing they do, so you can't really hire a lawyer to fight against them unless you have money saved in other ways. But at any rate, you're not really in control of your own money. You think you are, but you're not, unless you have a bunch of cash lying under your bed. But that's also not the safest thing. You can have a fire. You can get robbed. It just and it takes up a lot of space too. And you also can't use it that well. You can't use it all different places. All right, next. Enter Bitcoin. So Bitcoin was so Satoshi Nakamoto, who nobody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. It could have been a group of people. I don't want to, if we have time later, I can go into sort of the different theories about who this anonymous creator of Bitcoin was, which theory I personally think makes the most sense. But without getting, too into that mystery, in October 2008, shortly after the 2007 crisis, or during, I guess, Satoshi Nakamoto published the Bitcoin white paper. And then in January 2009, he released version 1 of the Bitcoin software, where he mined what's known as the Genesis block, which is, we'll explain what blocks are soon, but it was basically like the first, let's say, Bitcoin transaction, sort of. In this Bitcoin transaction, he signed it. And he signed it by saying, it's the 3rd of January, 2009, Chancellor on the brink of a second bailout for banks. I forgot, I don't think he was talking about the US Chancellor. I think he was talking about a European government. I forgot if I think it was the UK government, but I'm not positive. But he was basically talking about how they were about to bail out the banks again, who had just crashed the whole economy in 2007. And so this was from this message, you kind of understand where he was coming from in terms of why he wanted to create this thing. So what is it that he created? So the technology itself, the Internet of Money, so to speak, is called, is usually known as the blockchain. So I got this definition. This is a technical definition from Wikipedia. I'll sort of explain it. But the blockchain is a decentralized, distributed, and public digital ledger consisting of records called blocks that is used to record transactions across many computers so that any involved block cannot be altered retroactively without the alteration of all subsequent blocks. So remember, we said money is essentially a ledger, right? It's society's ledger. So what did he do? He decided, okay, well, let's take a ledger, a digital ledger. We'll start from zero. And instead of having one person keep that ledger, instead of having a trusted person that we all have to rely on and trust that they don't get corrupt, why don't we put that ledger in tens of thousands of computers and different devices all across the world, right? And that way, everyone has a copy of the ledger. And every time you have new transactions, they're added to the ledger every 10 minutes or so in what's known as blocks. And every computer in the network has to approve, and we'll explain soon how they're able to approve that whichever transactions happen. And like that, if someone tries to change one ledger on one computer, it doesn't work because you'd have to change the ledger on every single computer at the same exact time for you to be able to make any alterations. Which would be, especially now, but even back then, would be incredibly hard, incredibly expensive, easy to get caught because everyone has the copy of the ledger from 10 minutes ago also. You have to change the ledger from all the way in the beginning. But it sounds a lot more simpler, a lot more simple than it is because it involves a lot of serious computer science problems that he innovated solutions for with this thing called the blockchain. So okay, so next, so when it comes to so how does Bitcoin work? So let's say how does this ledger work? What's on the ledger, right? So every Bitcoin address, every one that owns Bitcoin, they have two things. You have what's known as a public key, and you have what's known as a private key. Because he used something that's called asymmetric encryption, which he did not make up. It existed before, where You have use the public key to close a file, it scrambles the data, and then decrypts it to the original text being the private key. So the public key is what you need to send money. Opposite. The public key is what you need to receive money. The private key is what you need to send money. Your public key basically is connected to your public address. And your public address is what's on the Bitcoin ledger. That's what's on the ledger that's on everyone's computer, that's public. So basically, on the Bitcoin ledger, you have every transaction ever made you have this, so you have, let's say, address A, but it's not really called address A. It's like 16 letters and numbers and randomized and everything else. Send this many Bitcoin to address B. And address B send out of those Bitcoin this many to this address, this many to that address, and so on and so forth. And it has all of the transactions ever made based on their public keys, based on their public addresses. Whereas your private key is a separate, really complicated collection of numbers and letters that you need in order to send the Bitcoin. So if I want to receive Bitcoin from you, I send you my public address. So in your Bitcoin client, okay, I'm sending, I want to send the Bitcoin. Let's say I want to send the Bitcoin to Usher. So I ask him for his address. He sends me his public address. But now, in order for me to be able to actually send him that money, and in order for me to access my Bitcoin, I need my private key. Nobody knows my private key but me. So I put in my private key that opens the wallet, so to speak, and now I'm able to send 1 Bitcoin to Usher's public address. And then that transaction is recorded on this ledger. And before it's recorded, all the other machines that are in the network, miners, which we'll talk about soon, make sure that I had that Bitcoin to send him. Meaning they go back and they check the entire ledger to make sure that from the beginning of the ledger, all the transactions that happened ended up with me at least having the ability to send him that 1 Bitcoin before I can send it to him. Okay. So that's a little complicated, but under the hood is a lot more complicated than over the hood, so to speak. But all you really have to know is that the public address is what everyone sees and what you need to receive Bitcoin. The private key is what you need to send it, and it's what you need to keep private. Okay. So how does Bitcoin get issued? We said that one of the big problems he was trying to solve was, all these central banks were just printing this money out of thin air to bail out these bankers that he felt, tanked the market, in 2007 through their whatever, I guess you would say, immoral speculation, where basically they got bailed out by the governments. And how they get bailed out by the governments? Because they printed money, which devalued all the money that everyone else had, all the victims essentially. So how does printing money work in Bitcoin? So in Bitcoin, instead of having money printed just whenever someone wants to print them, I'll just read what I wrote actually. Unlike fiat money, which can be printed ad infinitum based on the whims of kings, politicians, and central banks, there is a finite amount of Bitcoin that can never exist, 21 million in the case of Bitcoin. And its issuance is mathematically predictable with a simple look at the code, which is open source. Approximately every 10 minutes, a certain amount of new Bitcoin is printed or mined as a new block. A block is basically a new batch of transactions that's recorded on the ledger every 10 or so minutes. The amount of Bitcoin that's printed every 10 minutes is halved every 4 years. Why? So basically the reason there can only ever be 21 million Bitcoin is because of this halving process. If a good illustration is, in math, if you want to go between point A and point B and you go halfway every time, you never reach point B. You always get closer and closer, but you never reach point B. So there can only ever be slightly under 21 million Bitcoin because the amount of Bitcoin that's produced every 10 minutes keeps getting halved every time it gets halfway there. You can sort of see how that works in these graphs. You see, so when you were over here, you had 50 Bitcoin per block. Then you had the second halving, and then it was, you had the first halving, then it was 25 per block. And you had the second halving, and it was 12.5 per block. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the third halving in Bitcoin's history. And in this third halving in Bitcoin's history, the amount of Bitcoin produced every 10 minutes got cut in half once again. And the miners that mined the last block of the 12.5 block, they, realizing that there were a lot of similarities between, although there are also differences, but realizing there were a lot of similarities in terms of runaway printing of money between when Satoshi made the first block and now, they actually signed the last block right before this third halving, saying New York Times, April 9, 2020, with 2.3 trillion injection, Fed plan far exceeds 2008 rescue. And that was back then. I think it's like over 6 trillion now. I'm not saying like the printing isn't needed or whatever else. I'm just saying it does have consequences on the value of the money in our pockets. Okay, next. Okay, how do you get all these computers to agree with each other? And how do you get them to agree that every transaction is a real transaction? What if you're a good computer guy, you want to have your computer lie to the rest of the network, and you want to spend Bitcoin that you don't actually have, you want to fake transactions, etc. So Satoshi came up with a way to solve a problem in computer science known as the Byzantine generals problem. I'm not going to get too into the math of how this works because I think it would bore most people. And to be honest, I'm just not an expert on it myself. I did include some links for further reading for those that are interested. But essentially, the Byzantine generals problem is this abstract computer science problem where how do you get people that don't talk directly to each other necessarily to agree on something? So if you have one general outside of the north side of the city, another general on the south side, you have the city in the middle, and they want to send a message to each other about what time to attack. If one of them attacks out the other, they're going to lose. But if they attack at the same time, they're going to win. But the messenger between going from one army to another, he can A, become a traitor, or he can B, get intercepted by the other city, and he can basically give the other general the wrong message and ruin the whole thing. And that's with 2 generals. Now imagine the situation with 5 generals, with 10 generals, with 1,000 generals. It becomes more and more complex and much more easy to mess things up, really. So the way he sort of figured out how to deal with this problem was what's known as proof of work. He used different methods of cryptography, which is really complicated math, and computer science to come up with proof of work. Again, I'm not going to go into the exact details of how it works. If you want to use some of these links, they're pretty good explanations even for non-technical people if you're curious about them. But one thing that's important to know is this method that he devised called proof of work requires computing power. And not only does it require computing power, but the more computers that are involved in the network, the more computing power you have in the network, the more computing power it requires, and the more secure the system is. So the more power you have in the network, the harder it is for everyone to mine, and the more secure the system is. Now, with just that, you'd have sort of 2 outstanding issues with what I've kind of said until now, right? The 2 outstanding issues you have is, well, who's getting these new Bitcoins that are minted every 10 minutes? That's 1. And 2, how do you incentivize all these computers to put more power into the network? Power is not free. So the way you incentivize them is largely by giving them these new Bitcoin. So the way it works, and I'm sort of going to give a simplified version of it. So, and by the way, we're done with all the technical stuff now. So if I was boring everyone, I apologize. But basically the way it works is you have all these different computers that are putting their computing power into the network to make the network secure, to make it safe, to prevent fraud, to prevent, all these different things. Every 10 minutes, a new block is mined. That block has a certain amount of Bitcoin. Those Bitcoin go to one of the miners. It happens almost at random which miner they go to, but because it's not random, it's mathematical, it's statistical randomness. Basically, if you provide 20% of the network power that Bitcoin's powering, on average, you're going to get 20% of the mining reward. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, but on average, you're going to get 20% of those rewards. So the amount you put into the network as a percentage of the whole network, that's the amount of rewards you're going to get in terms of the amount of newly printed Bitcoin. The miners also get fees. So the miners are also the ones that have to accept transactions. So on Bitcoin transactions, there are minuscule fees involved that pay miners. But the vast majority of the money the miners make and what they're incentivized by right now is these new Bitcoins. These new Bitcoins that are being mined every 10 minutes, these new blocks. However, eventually, once the amount of new Bitcoins being mined is minuscule, and every 10 minutes you have 0.00001 Bitcoin being mined, at that point, that's when miners are going to be mostly getting their rewards through transaction fees. But by then, the theory is it's going to be so in use that those transaction fees will be worth a lot. I should point out that this is how it works in proof of work systems. As we'll probably discuss a little bit later, there are other consensus algorithm methods that people have introduced and that are trying. The biggest of which is proof of stake, which the Ethereum network is trying to switch to. But right now, proof of work is the only one that's been proven to work on a mass scale, like Bitcoin, because people try to hack Bitcoin all the time. It's never worked, never will work, just because of the cost that would be associated with it are astronomically high now. Probably would cost trillions and trillions of dollars and might not even work. And even if you do it, and even if you do break Bitcoin, you just spend trillions to break Bitcoin for what? So you can have control of the network, but now the network's not worth anything. So you just spend trillions on nothing, essentially. All right. And next. So now I want to talk about how Bitcoin sort of works as a currency, sort of some of its advantages, some of its drawbacks, etc. So as long as you hold your private keys, you own your own money. Not the bank, not the government, not some tech company like PayPal or Venmo, right? As long as you hold your own private keys, your money is yours. Now, that also comes with responsibility, because if you lose your private key, there's no "I forgot my password" button if you're literally holding your private key. That said, there are different ways where you can mitigate this, because there's different ways you don't almost nobody actually puts in their full private key when they log into a Bitcoin thing. There's other ways you can do it that are cryptographically secure. And if you lose access to them, you sort of have your private key written down on a piece of paper somewhere safe. However, if you totally lose access, you could lose it. It's like if you had a wallet with cash in it and you lost the cash. There's no getting it back. Nowadays, most people actually, not most, but a lot of people who own Bitcoin, especially people that aren't necessarily that technically savvy or don't really know what they're doing, a lot of people actually use services. They use custodial services or exchanges that hold their Bitcoin for them, essentially, where you can press "forgot your password," basically, where if you lose your password, they'll get it back to you, etc. However, this is a little bit antithetical to one of the points of Bitcoin, which was owning your own money, but it is a lot easier for user experience. So basically, if you own your private keys, you are your own bank. You really own your own money. But if you don't want to trust yourself with that, you could use a Bitcoin bank, essentially. All right. Another good thing about Bitcoin as a currency is, unlike gold or other commodities, it doesn't take up physical space. If, let's say, you don't trust fiat money for whatever reason, okay, fine. Oil's worth money. Well, not recently, but usually oil's worth money. Gold's usually worth money. You have these different things that are worth money, but where are you going to store them? How are you going to use them? With Bitcoin, it doesn't take any space to store it. You can have $100 million worth of Bitcoin, and it doesn't take any more space than 0.00001 of a Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, no matter how much you have, you can transfer any amount across the world pretty instantly with almost no fees. And you can divide it by as many times as you want. It's not a piece of gold where you have to weigh it, chop it up, and sort of figure it out and mail it, hope someone doesn't steal it. No, you can send it to anyone in the world right away in whatever denominations you want. You can send 0.1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10 to somebody right now, and no one can stop you. Nobody, as long as you have your private keys, nobody can freeze your account. Nobody can confiscate your Bitcoin. Now, they could come to you, put a gun to your head and say, "Hey, put in your private key, open your wallet, I want your Bitcoin." But if you say no, which I don't advise, by the way, but if you say no, if they kill you, they still have no access to your Bitcoin. If you're the only one that knew your private key, that Bitcoin's basically gone. Or let's say you had a way where you told your family members how to access it. They can't actually force you to give them their Bitcoin, even if they threaten you. Now, you might want to give them their Bitcoin instead of getting shot in the head. But that's a separate thing. The point is that it's really yours, and nobody can take it from you unless you give it to them willingly or under duress. You can send anywhere in the world for a minuscule fee, like I just said. This past November, someone moved $310 million worth of Bitcoin for 32 cents. Think about, if you were sending $320 million to somebody with the banking system, think about all the lawyers that were required, the escrow agents, all the fees involved. This person was able to do it for 32 cents this past November. Another thing, nobody can censor your transactions. Theoretically, if I want, I can send the Bitcoin right now to Kim Jong-un. I don't advise anyone send the Bitcoin to Kim Jong-un, but you could do it in theory if you want. Thank God we live in a country where this hasn't really been traditionally an issue, but who knows? Maybe one day you're going to want to send money to someone that the U.S. government or local politicians or someone doesn't like, and they just won't let you send the money because it's not your money. The bank's holding your money. The bank says, I don't really want to do it. And not only will they not let you send it, but then they might freeze all your money for even trying to send it. And you might not even have known you were sending it to someone that you shouldn't have been sending it to. Or maybe it's someone you should have been sending it to, but their politics disagrees with the politics of whoever's in power. With Bitcoin, you don't run into those issues because there's no centralized authority that has that control. Very importantly, no government or central bank can print extra Bitcoin out of thin air and devalue the Bitcoin you own. The amount of Bitcoin that can be produced is the same amount every 10 minutes, halved every 4 years, and it's distributed in the way that we know it's distributed. It's all mathematically verifiable. It's almost as private as cash. So it's not anonymous like people think it is because, like I said, every transaction is on this ledger. It's private in the sense that on this ledger, you have all these public keys, and you can use a different public key for almost any transaction you make because you can constantly create new ones. However, if you're a criminal, I do not advise you use Bitcoin because as long as you've linked your real life identity to one of your addresses, Bitcoin forensic experts have the tools to pretty much comb through the entire ledger and essentially link all these other Bitcoin transactions you've probably ever made, where all the other Bitcoin transactions that have been linked to this address. Because let's say, you make a new address that you put a Bitcoin into, and let's say use it to buy something that links you to your real identity. Now, if you're a forensics expert, you can track how the Bitcoin in that wallet got there through every transaction from the first ever transaction in Bitcoin. And that's how they end up catching a lot of these people that do hacks, that steal a lot of Bitcoin. I think it was in the Post just like 2 days ago, they caught this kid, I guess when he was 15, he led this sort of like gang of crypto hackers, and he stole 20-something million from this guy in crypto. Now, several years later, they were able to track everything and catch him. And they're able to prove that it was him because at some point he connected his real identity to the Bitcoin somehow, which is almost impossible not to use it at some point. And they're able to catch you for something that you did years ago. So please, if you're doing anything illegal, do not use Bitcoin. I will say that there are different protocols that are being worked on. There's other cryptocurrencies that have either made or are trying to make anonymous ledgers where you actually would be fully anonymous. And those are ones that, A, criminals like them more, but also B, people that want to be fully anonymous also like them more because at the end of the day, money in many ways is like speech, and your money is, and what you want to do with your money, as long as you're not hurting anyone, should be a civil right, as far as your privacy is concerned, just like cash is. And lastly, with the blockchain, with the Bitcoin ledger, you have transparency and accountability. Because imagine if the government got all its taxes in Bitcoin or some other currency that was on a public ledger, where then any money they spent, whether it's the government or let's say a charity, and where any money they spent had to be using Bitcoin, let's say, or some other similar type of thing, then you'd be able to track where every single dollar goes. So you'll be able to see if, magically half the money goes to their brother, sister, uncle, or magically some of it disappears. You'd actually be able to see where the money goes from nonprofits, from government, which would really, A, stop a lot of corruption, and B, would really, I think, really create a lot of trust in public institutions. Next. Okay, so we talked about the first application of Bitcoin as a currency, the first killer app. However, there's a lot of other applications. Now, these applications are usually, or tokens or whatever, when people talk about, let's say, the top 100 coins or whatever they call it. So there's a difference between coins and tokens. There's a difference between blockchain networks and tokens that are on top of blockchain networks. I'm going to talk about them in the next slide when we talk about Ethereum. But first, I just kind of wanted to look at this general overview of the top 100 applications, cryptocurrencies, however you want to call them, based on their market caps and what they do. So you have the currencies over here, which Bitcoin, is the far leader of. So this is, by the way, showing, as far as the percentages, it's showing how much the value has gone up in US dollars since the beginning of the year. And then how big this is shows how big of a percentage of the market cap of the top 100 is in this particular thing. So, Bitcoin by far is the leader. These are from forks of Bitcoin that I don't really want to get into, but maybe we'll get into them. I don't know how much time we have. It's 9:30. Okay, maybe we'll get into them later if someone asks about them. But these are all different types of currency projects using blockchain. XMR is Monero, which is one of the ones that's trying to be anonymous totally. Then over here, you have blockchain infrastructure. So here's where you can build a lot of other interesting applications that are beyond currency. Ethereum is the biggest of these by far. And on Ethereum, you could do a lot of these other applications we were talking about, and we'll talk about them shortly in the next slide. Time is probably running out, so I'll try to go quickly. Over here, you have what's known as stable coins. So stable coins, they started a couple of years ago with what was known as Tether. So the thing with the Bitcoin markets is until Bitcoin gets kind of popular enough, it's pretty volatile. It's going through what's known as price discovery. Nobody knows how much a Bitcoin's really worth, and how much it's worth is changing because not enough people use it where it's completely stable. So this was very annoying for traders, especially because if you're trading Bitcoin to Ethereum to other currencies, and it's a 24-hour market, it's a worldwide market. It doesn't close between 9 and 5. There's no circuit breakers when you don't like the way things are going. It was very hard for traders to kind of do things. So they made this thing called stable coins, where basically this company, the one that got really big was Tether, would say, hey, you send us $1, we'll send you 1 Tether. Every Tether is worth $1 US. So they pegged the crypto to the dollar, and basically anytime you want to sell it, you can in theory go to them and tell them, hey, here's 100 Tether. Okay, they'll say, here's $100. Or you'll say, hey, here's $100. They'll say, here's 100 Tether. Now, Tether itself is a little bit of a controversial company because they can only prove 70% of their reserves, because another 30% they say are frozen, whichever banks. But a lot of the newer ones are backed by actually big banks. Like you have GUSD, you have USDC, which are backed by Chase and JP Morgan respectively. Oh, actually not Chase. They're backed by JP Morgan, where you have actually US banks now backing these stablecoins. Another interesting thing these stablecoins allow you to do is now you can have lending of basically things that are worth dollars on the blockchain. Because let's say, for example, and I think I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. Sorry, I don't want to jump ahead. Then you have different things that are exchange tokens. So exchange tokens are basically, they're not exactly stocks in a company, but they function similarly, where if they're created correctly, and you have to do your research on each one, if the mechanics work right, then the more a certain service is in use, the more their value will go up. So BNB is the most successful of these. Sorry. So BNB is made by Binance, which is the biggest, probably most trusted Bitcoin exchange and crypto exchange in the world. And so their token is BNB. So if you sort of want a piece of Binance's success, you buy BNB, and then as they're successful and they do different things, that goes up in value. But you have to look at the exact token mechanics and how that works. I unfortunately don't have time to get into it in too much detail right now. All right, let's talk a little bit about Ethereum. and then we'll open up for questions. So I'm not going to talk about proof of stake right now because, so like I said, Ethereum is launching a new version of Ethereum very shortly. The purpose, one of the big purposes of this shift is because they're trying to change their consensus mechanism from proof of work to proof of stake. So you don't need to have all this power powering the network. I'm going to take that back for a second. One thing that Ethereum does is Ethereum is really the instrument of money, programmable money. I'm sure a lot of you heard about the ICO craze in 2017, where all these companies were raising millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, sometimes even billions of dollars on basically ideas. It basically was a way to decentralize venture funding. Unfortunately, there was a lot of scams also involved. There was a lot of people that had no idea about what anything was, just jumped into the market and just invest into things because there was a couple of months where you could literally put money into anything, into any idea that made absolutely no sense, even that was a total scam, and would go up 100x in a couple of months. The vast majority of these companies don't exist anymore. A couple of them still exist, and a couple of them are doing well, but the vast majority of them don't exist. But the way this worked was most of these token issuances were done on the Ethereum network. So on Ethereum, you have Ether, which is the native token, much like Bitcoin that you can transfer. But Ethereum is much more programmable than Bitcoin is in its current state. The Bitcoin developers basically are very conservative about adding features to the Bitcoin blockchain because the more features you add, the more potential attack vectors there are for hackers, etc. So they just want it to be, let's just keep it as just money because we don't want to risk the network. Whereas Ethereum is more about trying to do a lot of other things on it. So on Ethereum, in addition to the base kind of layer where you have Ethereum transferring from person to person, you have what's known as tokens that are built on top of it. So most of these ICOs were done with these tokens. So essentially the way that works, let me go back, let me do a stock example. Let's say I own a company and I wanted to issue shares. And I don't want to do them on the regular market, it's expensive, blah, blah, blah. I want to issue shares on the blockchain. So I could issue my shares on the Ethereum blockchain. I could program my thing to be a certain amount of shares, and then I could, give it to whoever I want to give it to, right? And then the Ethereum blockchain would then, the security powering the Ethereum blockchain would then be what's securing essentially the shares that I just gave out. And anyone would be able to see essentially who has how many shares of my token. And then if people want to transfer tokens between each other, they can, unless I set up rules to say they can't. And the way they would just have to spend a little bit of Ether whenever they want to transfer these tokens. Okay. Now, because things on Ethereum are programmable, I could also set up rules around those shares. I could set up things like voting rights. So every certain amount of shares gives you a certain amount of voting rights when we vote in things in public. Or I could set up rules saying, let's say I want to sell the shares in the public thing where anyone in the world can invest, which is kind of what ICOs are supposed to be. I can make it in a way where anyone that sends this much Ethereum, I pick an address, and anyone that sends this much Ethereum gets back a certain amount of my tokens. So let's say I say 1 Ethereum is 1 Alex Incorporated token. So if you send 100 Ethereum to this issuer address, it sends back 100 Alex Incorporated tokens. I could also program in the way where there can only ever be 1,000 Alex Incorporated tokens. Or I can program in a way where it starts with 1,000, but then if the majority of people with these tokens vote to create more, we can create more, similar to how regular sort of equity distributions would work, except these would be programmed in a way where sort of everyone sees is transparent, etc. Okay, so that was kind of what made Ethereum really popular initially. Were these ICOs, because most of them took place on the Ethereum network. That was its killer app before that all went bust, essentially. What Ethereum is really big in right now, and what's most well known for is its decentralized finance ecosystem. So we were talking before about loans, right? Let's say I have 100 Ethereum, right? But I don't want to spend my Ethereum because I think it's going to go up in value, and also I don't want to whatever reason I don't want to spend my Ethereum. But I need some money, but I think Ethereum's going to go up. I don't want to spend it. I want to take a loan and use my Ethereum as collateral. So I can use one of these decentralized platforms to basically do something like, hey, I'm going to put my 100 Ethereum up as collateral. In exchange, I'm going to get, let's say, I think Ethereum's $200 right now. So whatever. Let's say, I'm going to make it easier. Let's say Ethereum's worth $1. It's not, it's worth 200. But let's say Ethereum was worth $1. I'm going to put my 100 Ethereum up as collateral to take a $50 loan in stable coins, because because there's all these coins that are worth exactly $1 each. And then I can spend my stable coins however I want. We agree on an interest rate. As long as I'm paying the interest, everything's fine. And then if Ethereum the price gets too low, to the point where the collateral is about to no longer cover what I borrowed, then I just lose the Ethereum. The Ethereum gets automatically switched into a stable coin and gets sent to the issuer. And all this can be done without any company in the middle, without any brokers in the middle. It can all be done instantaneously, basically programmed that way on a decentralized platform. You can also have exchanges that run decentralized, so you don't have to actually trust a company to store them. They're done in a decentralized manner. You have prediction markets. You have insurance platforms. You have decentralized autonomous organizations, which is a whole other thing. Sorry, it's 9:40, and I want to open up for questions. So I think, I'll stop right now because Ethereum is a very long, complicated conversation. I just sort of wanted to give a taste of these other applications beyond just currency. And yeah, let's open up for questions.
Okay, Alec, you have already questions on the chat. I don't need to voice them. You can read them yourself.
Sure. Dima, yes. So all of these aren't just. So hold on. All of these,
okay, so let's read the question.
Example, aren't just ideas. Oh, sorry, sir. So Dima asked, the list of potential applications of this methodology is impressive. Is there anything truly developed / accepted that in decentralized finance? Yes. So this decentralized finance has really taken off, especially in the last 2 years or so. These are all companies that exist right now that do different decentralized finance things. Some of them are managing more money than others. DAO, which is the biggest one, I believe, I gotta look up the statistics, but I think there was literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of loans issued on MakerDAO as of like last month. And there's other companies that do similar things. So there's real money that's being used in these decentralized platforms right now. Now, are we, it's still early days, right? It's still very much Netscape. We're not, we're not up to Google yet. We're not up to Gmail. We're not up to Facebook, and in terms of usability and everything. It's still Netscape. But there is a lot of real money in decentralized finance right now. You could kind of look up some of these companies. I could give you some research to check out, but it's very much in use right now, and it's growing at an exponential rate. There are a lot of companies that are working on the issuance of equities and other sorts of things in the blockchain. A few exist and are already doing with commodities. Like you can buy gold on the blockchain, you can buy other things on other commodities on the blockchain. With equities, there's a couple of very large companies, very well-funded companies with working on it. The biggest issue is, of course, regulations, because you have to, abide by all the regulations. These are some examples of some of the bigger ones. Harbor, Polymath. I would say Harbor. I think probably Harbor is probably the biggest one right now. But there's other ones as well. Alex, how does Bitcoin translate into dollars or other currencies? So the amount of dollars Bitcoin is worth at any given time is the amount of dollars people are willing to pay for it. Meaning, there's a public market, right? So something I like to compare it to stocks. It's a little bit easy, even though they're not stocks. Bitcoin isn't a stock, but I like to compare the pricing mechanism. So how much is Apple worth? It's worth whatever the market value of Apple is. The market's open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. It has circuit breakers, has whatever else it has, but basically it's worth whatever it's currently worth in the market. With Bitcoin, the market isn't just in the U.S. It's a global market, it's decentralized, so it's open 24 hours a day. On any given day, there's billions, maybe even over. I could tell you. Hold on. Am I sharing my full screen or only my keynote?
No. I turn off the sharing, so you.
Okay, that's fine. So any given day, you can go to a website called coinmarketcap.com. Let me send it. Coinmarketcap.com. Right? Go to coinmarketcap.com. It will show you the top 100 cryptocurrency market valuation and their current value, what their market cap is, how much volume they have. So Bitcoin, the last 24 hours, has had $33 billion of US value traded in the last day, meaning people were buying and selling $33 billion worth of Bitcoin on these public markets. Some of these public markets most of them are centralized exchanges, but there exist also decentralized exchanges as well now that are functional. So right now, Bitcoin is worth $9,215. Why? Because that $33 billion that people have been trading for in the last 24 hours, that was the price the market basically agreed to, just like the market of Apple agreed to whatever Apple costs at the end of the day. The big difference is that Apple is only in the US. You have to be able to participate in the US market to be able to do that. It's only traded between 9 and 5. And they have things like circuit breakers where you can sort of stop the market when you want to. Whereas the Bitcoin market is functioning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no circuit breakers globally. So with Bitcoin, I would say you have a much more truer price discovery in that sense. Okay. So Bitcoin is a currency or a commodity? It's both. It's a little of both, right? So it's a new type of thing. It has one of the reasons regulators have had such a someone asked, is Bitcoin a currency or a commodity? So one of the reasons regulators, for example, have a lot of trouble with Bitcoin is because largely they don't know to qualify as a currency or as a commodity, because it has features of a commodity, but also has features of a currency, and it's sort of this thing in the middle. And it's all over a category of its own that has features of both a currency and features of a commodity. And it's not I wouldn't call it a commodity because you can use it to pay for things very easily. Commodities you can't really use to pay for things like that. But a currency almost has like a pegged value that's set. Whereas Bitcoin, the value versus dollars is constantly changing, but that's because the real value of Bitcoin hasn't been discovered yet, right? It's still going through price discovery. Whenever in the world knows about Bitcoin, people are using Bitcoin a lot. At some point, it's going to level out. In fact, the volatility in Bitcoin over the years has gone down tremendously, even though it's very volatile compared to other things. But in the long run, it has been sort of going up. Yes, according to the IRS, yes, the IRS taxes crypto as property. Some countries tax crypto as commodity. Some countries tax crypto as currency. The IRS, since I think it was like 2013 or 2012, has taxed Bitcoin as property, except with the 2018 tax code that Trump introduced. They actually specifically said that some of the loopholes that apply to real estate, like Trump's holdings, they specifically said don't apply to Bitcoin, which was kind of a dick move. Sorry for my So, okay, commentary here. Here is a mild scenario from a recent past. During Sandy, there was no electricity, hence no blockchain asset. Now say, okay, so interesting thing about Bitcoin, a couple of things. One, and I would send you some more interesting articles that go through the technical details because I know you'd be interested in that. So you don't actually need electricity to send Bitcoins. You can technically send Bitcoin through the mail, through Messenger, through pigeons. You can have pigeons carry Bitcoins as long as somebody is adding it to the blocks. You also right now have these different projects where you have a lot of different satellites in space with the Bitcoin ledger that are kind of blasting and mining Bitcoin. For more technical kind of end of the world scenarios and how Bitcoin would work with that, I'd rather point you to some really good articles, some really good videos because I'm not an expert on the technical side of it. But there are ways it can work. And also, I think if things are that bad, we have a lot bigger problems than Bitcoin, to be honest. Question: what would drive the valuation of one crypto of another? So like I said, I don't really want to discuss pricing. I want to discuss investment advice. A lot of this stuff is new. If anyone knew exactly what drives the value of a crypto, they'd be very rich because they would just use that to drive it. At the end of the day, they're really driven right now by open markets, by what people feel they're worth. So I will say, so like I said initially, that money's supposed to be a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and store of value. As time has gone on, Bitcoin itself has really proven the store of value, right? However, because it's been such a good store of value over time, it hasn't been used as a medium of exchange that much, because most people that hold Bitcoin now, especially people that had it back when I was first introduced to Bitcoin, it was like $100 a Bitcoin. I would like send like half a Bitcoin to friends here, there, everywhere, just kind of get them into it, just to do explanations, presentations, etc. And now, that means I was just sending $5,000 here, $5,000 there, $5,000 there, $5,000 there, like it was nothing. And a lot of people have had that experience. So people are much less willing to actually spend their Bitcoin now because it's been such a good store of value. So it's become a very good store of value, not as good of a medium of exchange. The unit of account is still working based on the public market. But different things drive different values of different cryptos. Like, for example, something like BNB, which is Binance Coin, they create certain economics where the more people use their exchange, the less Binance Coin there is, and also the more people want to get Binance Coin because it gives them advantages in their exchange, and that causes the value of Binance Coin to go up. So it really depends on individual crypto. Where something like Ethereum, what made Ethereum really jump in 2017 was that you had all these ICOs that were issued on the Ethereum network. So in order to participate into them, you had to buy Ethereum to invest into the tokens. So it really depends on what type of crypto it is, kind of what methodology works for the pricing. It really just depends on what type of crypto it is. Like whether it's a currency, whether it's a blockchain infrastructure, whether it's a token, whether it's, whatever it is. Yes, there's a lot of day traders of Bitcoin. A lot. It's a huge industry. So in general, like what I tell people is, if you want to invest in like this sort of thing, just from what I've seen from my own sort of experience losing a lot of it, the best thing you can do is really buy the ones that you really believe in and forget about them. Just forget about them for a long time. The Bitcoin experiment is either going to work or not, right? It's either, at least in my view, it's either going to be something like $1 million of Bitcoin or $0 of Bitcoin. Eventually, I'm not saying next year or in 5 years. I'm saying in the long run. So that's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it is you can dollar cost average in, right? Because sometimes it's down, sometimes it's up, so that you can get an average price. I don't recommend day trading personally because Bitcoin's very volatile, a lot more volatile than most markets, and it's a 24-hour market, right? And you could switch into stable coins when you go to sleep. You could set stop losses, etc. But it's still a 24-hour market. You're not going to be up for 24 hours. You could have algorithms trading, obviously, but my advice is to people that want to day trade Bitcoin, unless you really know what you're doing and unless you can really kind of focus on it. And the best way you can day trade Bitcoin is by giving it to a fund where they're professionals, especially, and not just like a fund that just trades. Make sure you give it to a fund that has a very good track record with trading crypto, because the market's a bit different than traditional markets. And if you want to get trading action, just give it to a fund that is good at that. And that's really the only day trading I would recommend to do it personally. But you feel free to do whatever you want. And then a lot of people do trade because, like I said, just today there was $33 billion in Bitcoin day traded. Because the $33 billion on CoinMarketCap, that isn't the amount of transactions that happened on the Bitcoin network. That's the amount of trades that happened on exchanges. Just to be clear, in case I don't think I explained that distinction well earlier. Okay. Any other questions? Where is the money? It's in our imaginations, like every other form of money. So it's on the public ledger.
Alex, if you're asking where is the money, or if we will quote Jerry Maguire, show me the money. The question is how it's different if from the model of PayPal. If we will take the PayPal and separate it from the bank accounts, as it's unfortunately now PayPal, it's very reportable to IRS, and a lot of people do not like PayPal and move to Zelle and Quick Money and so on. But it's also the same.
But the big difference is, I'll explain. So the biggest difference is that there's no centralized thing. So with Bitcoin, there's no such thing as Bitcoin. There's no Bitcoin company. There's no CEO of Bitcoin. It's just a technology that runs itself because of the mechanics with the miners and incentivizations, right?
I understand. The market of the Bitcoin grows with every transaction. This is all the idea. And that's why it's decentralized. It's all up to the people that participate in the market. But if you go PayPal, it's not a company that kind of manage the money, manage the currency. The PayPal is something that provides the service. If we will take in decentralized PayPal from connecting into the bank and now with all the requirements that they have due to government regulations, because they got Elon Musk got at the beginning a lot of funds from the government to develop this company, but just decentralize it and use it as just a major bubble of transaction. It could be translated to the same cryptocurrency.
How are you gonna? But that's impossible to do because PayPal is transferring dollars back and forth. You can't transfer dollars back and forth without a bank or a government because they're the ones issuing the dollars.
Correct. And this is what makes it centralized. Okay, let me.
There's two things that make it centralized. That, but also the fact that you actually need a company running it. You need like support services, PayPal. But if you're asking, hey, is one of the main ideas of crypto to have a decentralized version of PayPal? Then yes.
So then I translate my question to more fiscal sense. From my experience, the best way to use the tool to use for the donations online is PayPal when we move it to Bitcoin.
So you could accept Bitcoin now. It's very easy to accept payments in Bitcoin. I can set you up with it really easily. And there's going to be almost basically no, even if you want to get the money, even if you want people to donate to you in Bitcoin and you get the money in dollars, you can use their basically Bitcoin payment. They charge way less than PayPal, and there's no such thing as chargebacks, which is one of the better.
Because PayPal, no. I know a lot of people that are participating in this lecture are donating in the PayPal, and it's set up very comfortably in our website. But just to let you know that the money of the PayPal are reported to IRS. But don't worry, only if you donate over the year over $5,000, then it's reported on the personal level. So you can be relaxed. But
right. But so just one other quick point about PayPal. So a decentralized version of PayPal would theoretically solve the issue of the money transfer part, but wouldn't solve the issue of what it is you are transferring, right? You're still transferring dollars that the Fed just printed 6 trillion more of that they used to, I think, buy up the market.
Let's think about this technically. At a certain moment, PayPal will decide we're not transferring the dollars. We transfer all the accounts that we have to equivalent of that moment of the Bitcoin value in dollars.
Yes.
And they're good to go.
Well, yeah, and also you have to also realize, like when they say like the Fed printed $6 trillion, they didn't print physical money. They just added zeros on a digital ledger. It's just a digital ledger that only they have access to.
But probably if they do so, it probably crash all the cryptocurrency market.
I don't think so because again, for example, a lot of countries are looking into issuing their own cryptocurrencies. China's announced it, Sweden's announced it. A lot of countries are trying. Russia announced it a long time ago, but I don't think they ever did anything. Venezuela tried to do it. But the thing is, when the government issues its own cryptocurrency, what?
No. Venezuela cryptocurrency.
No, they try to do it because they're both are.
Ребят, в Венесуэле нет стабильного интернета. Какой cryptocurrency?
Actually, Bitcoin.
Forget about stable internet. I just want to announce officially that the Chabad Shalech in Venezuela in Caracas already reached Montreal, which is his hometown. That there is no Chabad in Venezuela right now. It's done. It's doomed.
But if a government makes their own crypto, it's just a digital fiat, right? And not only that, but remember, on the blockchain, so unfortunately, when governments start issuing their own crypto, it's going to be even worse than the way fiat money is now, because at least now you do still have cash. But if a government's saying, okay, now everyone has to use these digital dollars we give you, not only does the government have full control of how much dollars are in circulation, not only can they print wherever they want, send it wherever they want, but they can have full control over what you can do now. So you already have this in China. So in China, most people use things like WeChat, right? And I'm sure when you live there, you have WeChat, right? WeChat isn't only a messaging service and the social network, but it's how they pay for things. It's also their PayPal. It's all in one, except that the government really controls the company. And so if they don't want somebody getting money, they just freeze their account, basically. You're not allowed to send them money anymore. And they actually have that because they have this whole social credit system there. And not only that, but every purchase you make, since there's no more cash, is now recorded by the government and whoever else, and it can and probably will be used against you at some point. So actually, digital fiat money, cryptocurrencies issued by sovereign governments, is actually a very dystopian nightmare. So the thing with Bitcoin, like most technologies, is you have potential for good and you have potential for bad, right? Internet, great. Now knowledge is decentralized. Everyone gets to know knowledge. Oh, now you have crazy conspiracy theories also. Now everyone doesn't know what's true or not too. Okay, now you have certain companies that take over those markets and now they get to decide what's allowed or what's not, right? Same with crypto. So with open blockchains like Bitcoin itself, no one person's controlling them. You can add privacy features. You can add different features. But if you have a government issue it, and it's a government that wants to control its people, it's very easy to use this same technology now to have more surveillance and more control.
So then we have to move to WhatsApp with the cryptocurrency.
WhatsApp is owned by Facebook.
Yeah, WhatsApp is
not only is it owned by Facebook, but the Israeli guys that created it left Facebook. One of them left billions on the table because one of his conditions to selling it was they were supposed to keep certain encryption, and they were not living up to that. So he literally left, I think, like $800 million that didn't invest yet on the table and left to make a point that, hey, you can't trust WhatsApp anymore. He then donated $30 million to the Signal Foundation, which runs a secure messaging app called Signal, which actually a lot of crypto people use.
But in defense of Facebook, today Zuckerberg announced that he strongly criticized Twitter and Darcy for criticizing Trump for his Twitter.
Fine,
Facebook will never do things like this.
But Dorsey is very big on Bitcoin because Square, which is his other company, Cash App, is becoming one of the most popular places to buy Bitcoin, actually.
But he's too much biased against our friend.
Okay, Pop, I'm not trying to get into politics.
Okay, I actually have a comment.
Yes.
So, in theory, everything that you have listed, right? All of those features are tremendous features. They bypass this and that and this limitation. However, I think, and this is not a fully formed opinion, right? I'm thinking as I speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll try to communicate. I think there is a built-in assumption that despite everything, there are still going to be functioning states that will provide sufficient order, which you want to bypass partially. However, the problem is, I think with the advent of this complete potential, let's use the word anarchy for lack of a better word, there is a good chance, hold on.
I disagree with the term. But
anarchy in the sense that there is no state, right? In theory, states may completely disintegrate, and then the system will no longer work, right? It will eat itself, right? Because you do need a functioning state with legal code and everything. You understand what I mean, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
no, I totally understand. So there are people that are into crypto that are like crypto anarchists that want to destroy the Fed and all these other things. I'm not one of them. I don't think it's an either or thing. I don't think fiat money is going anywhere. I don't think governments are going anywhere. I don't think the dollar is going anywhere. I don't think the yen's going anywhere. I don't think the yuan's going anywhere unless there's some world war. But what the reason I personally am into Bitcoin is because Bitcoin gives sort of an alternate system that you could use, right? Now, as a U.S. citizen, still pay your taxes, 100% pay your taxes, because like I said, they're going to catch you eventually once their technology catches up, right? So that's one. Two, don't do anything illegal. Follow the regulations, follow all your country's regulations. Like, I love being a citizen of the U.S., so I follow the regulations because the U.S., I think, is worth it. If not, I wouldn't live here. But it's good that I have this system that I could use that doesn't rely on the third party, because if, let's say, all this printing of all these trillions of dollars ends up in a couple of years, and meaning that the dollars in my pocket are now not worth anything, or worth a lot less, what was the point of saving them in a savings account when they were just going down value? Whereas something like Bitcoin can theoretically go way up in value, especially if the dollar goes down in value against the dollar. So I don't think it's an either or type of thing. Not only that, but now banks are incorporating a lot of blockchain technology. JP Morgan tried to launch their own coin recently. I think Chase did a call with their clients recently on all the Bitcoin stuff. All these financial institutions that were anti-Bitcoin, saying it was bullshit, whatever, now they're either integrating it or getting involved with it. Chase is banking two of the biggest Bitcoin companies right now, Circle and Coinbase. So traditional finance is merging with the system because they know that if they don't, they're going to disappear, similar to how something like Blockbuster disappears when you have a Netflix. The banks, unless they adapt these new technologies, will disappear because people will go to new technologies because they're just going to be better. And it's going to take time, but that's where they'll go. But that's why the banks are incorporating a lot of these technologies now. They're working with these companies because they're not stupid. And, it was a few years, at first they were ignoring it, then they were bashing it, and now they realize it's not going away. Now, it is possible that if a bunch of the biggest world governments basically say, we all want to ban Bitcoin, we all want to do whatever, then is Bitcoin screwed? Realistically, yeah. Can you still use it? Sure. But how many people are going to use it? If that happens, not many. So it's possible. But right now, for example, I was reading a study recently. So Grayscale Investments is a big Wall Street fund, and they disclosed their Bitcoin stakes. So they for the last few months, they were buying 1/3 of all newly minted Bitcoins. And their total, the total publicly disclosed, I hope I'm not misquoting this, but total publicly disclosed amount of Bitcoin owned by Wall Street right now is 500,000 Bitcoin, which is a very large percentage of all the Bitcoin in existence. So again, I don't think it's one system destroying the other. I think it's one system having much better technology, the other system having to adapt to stay relevant, and I think you can have both going simultaneously. That's my own opinion. China has a very schizophrenic relationship with Bitcoin, for example, because half the time they're trying to ban it, half the time they're secretly pushing it, because China hates it because they lose control, but they love it because it could make the dollar lose control. So they're a little bit bipolar about Bitcoin. But yeah.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we come to the conclusion. Alec, really, I enjoyed it very much. Even my wife thought that
it's complicated.
It's more complicated than Jewish art of its non-existence. But I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
It's also the shady area.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a lot less shady than cash.
All right, Alec, thank you very much. I want to wish everybody that the holiday of Shavuos will. I tell like this. I want to finish it with the Dvar Torah. That from my understanding before, and especially now with Alec's deep explanation, I believe that this is a absolutely visible and pure sign of Bias Mashiach. Because with Bias Mashiach, it's very strange to consider that all the world will be trading in shekels. However, according to one of the commentaries, I believe Rabbeinu Bachya said this, that when Mashiach will come, that the land of Israel will stretch all around the world, and we literally will need something decentralized, because not necessarily, according to this opinion, not necessarily all the Jews will move specifically geographically to Israel, but other way around, the Israel will spread towards us. So I think it would be a very good solution, as we say, миру евреям деньги, a very good solution to manage this world again through the bitcoins. So God willing, this is another sign of coming of Mashiach. Let us all climb the Mount Sinai peacefully and go down from Mount Sinai straight to the land of Israel together with Mashiach. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Amen.